Good evening, 12s, and welcome to the Seahawks 360 podcast, where we look at the Seahawks from every angle every week. I'm Candace Higgins,
Now I'm Tino Ganasius.
and we are back to discuss a very disappointing loss to the 49ers. Seahawks go down in that game 36-24. So, really, what we want to do today is just talk about where we are as a team. State of the Seahawks, which ironically stands for S.O.S. And it seems like the Seahawks do need some help. So, Tino, let's just backtrack for a minute and talk about all the things that have happened since the loss to the 49ers. What's happening with the state of the Seahawks, man?
Lots of injuries. I wouldn't say a big acquisition, but a depth acquisition that is going to impact this team. And I think in my opinion, at least, a reassessment of expectations for this year and potentially moving forward. So Rayshon Jenkins placed on the IR, going to miss at least 4 games, eligible to come back week 12 against the Cardinals. You likely see, Kobe Bryant, Ty Okada, Kayvon Wallace, someone like that step into the second safety role. Artie Burns, who had just kind of started getting some time, is on the IR. He's out for the same number of games. You've got Trey Brown likely out for this week. He has not practiced so far this week. You've got Reek Woolen, who has not practiced yet. So the secondary is banged up. And I think that's a bit of an understatement against an Atlanta group of skill position players that are very good. And so we'll preview that in a minute, but that's not great. What is great is Boye Mafe was a full participant in practice on Thursday. Leonard Williams was a full participant in practice on Thursday. Byron Murphy was a limited participant. So that front seven is pretty much healthy at this point. And then you add Roy Robertson Harris, who was traded from the Jaguars to the Seahawks. A little bit of background on him. Undrafted out of UTEP in 16, played for the Bears for 5 seasons, been with Jacksonville since 21. He's got 19 career sacks. This is a Seahawks team that has allowed the 3rd most rushing yards over the last 3 games in the NFL. Robertson Harris is signed through 26, $5.6 million in 25, $5.8 million in 26. So a not so cheap depth piece. But if he can be a run plugger and kind of help out with some of that rotational depth, right? And you're bringing in an experienced veteran, and you can keep guys like Byron Murphy and Leonard Williams a little bit more fresh. I think this is a smart acquisition. You didn't give up much, around 6 next year. So the front seven looks to be healthy. Really, those are the big bits of news. Other players that were out. Stone Forsythe did not practice either with a hand injury. We're looking at probably a 4th string right tackle at that point. Kenny McIntosh didn't practice. Ty Lockett didn't practice. I haven't seen Lockett as a doubtful or out yet, so I assume Lockett will play. But banged up, the secondary I think is the big concern. But getting that front seven healthy again can make up for a banged up secondary potentially against a pretty poor Atlanta Falcons offensive line.
Yeah, definitely a lot to go over there. There's a lot of transactions happening. Unfortunately, like you said, most of it is injury related. It seems like we've gone from, with the Lions game, talking about missing all of your front seven and that not being healthy, but having your secondary healthy, to literally just the opposite of that. The secondary is
Well,
pretty much depleted now. The front seven is back healthy, and I guess there are worse situations to be in, but it is unfortunate because I always did question, just even going back to preseason, for those of you who didn't watch, my biggest concerns were in the secondary for months. I spent trepidation over the safety depth. Ultimately, begin to feel better about it once training camp started. But we're back at those guys that I was wringing my hands over at, Kobe Bryant and I guess Ty Okada. I didn't even know to wring my hands over him, but here we are. I was never sure if Julian Love would be able to step in and be the level of player that I think Quandre Diggs was. That seems like he's done pretty good. So that seems like it has taken care of itself. But I think outside of Julian Love, there are some legitimate questions about what's happening in that safety room. Kayvon Wallace has not really stepped up and been a guy that I think we all hoped he could be.
Mhm.
You also have had mixed results from Rayshawn Jenkins, who, like you said, is on IR now, but he's had some pretty bad plays on tape. Poor tackling techniques seems to be his big thing, and having a safety that can't tackle is really problematic. And it's interesting because he was kind of brought in as like he's just a do your job guy, and he's
Mhm.
not really, frankly, been doing his job. That seems to be a challenge. Um, happy to reinforce and what I consider to be an area of strength on the team, given that run defense is a challenge. Seems like Mike McDonald's not happy with the depth. Probably the rotations are really messing things up. I
Mhm.
think he wants to keep guys fresh, but they must not be pleased with what they're seeing from guys like Miles Adams, from Mike Morris, even. And Mike Morris has struggled, and I've seen that in the games as well. So they're bringing in other guys. I think you never knew for sure if he was going to be able to make up for the contract that he got. And I think there's a much to do still about the contract that he received. He's
Mhm.
not living up to it anyway. But if he was playing, I think pretty decently. I think his price tag in today's world is adequate for a decent, starter caliber defensive lineman. The problem is he's just not being a starter caliber defensive lineman, mostly because of his issues with setting the edge, which was always going to be a concern when you were talking about playing him on the outside, right?
Mhm.
He struggled with, I mean, when you brought him in, that was one of his known weaknesses, was not being able um to be able to play well against the run.
Right.
But also, he's not done that great against the pass either. Like, he's not a guy creating pressure. He's not a guy creating penetration. I think you're getting, frankly, more of that from a Jaron Reed,
Mhm.
um, from Leonard Williams.
Mhm.
So we'll see what the addition of Boye Mafe makes the rest of the defensive line look like. This defensive line still, I think, is a lead, like a top contender in terms of numbers of pressures, but you're just not seeing the impact
Right.
on a down basis. And so that's where you got to look at a guy like Draymond. But um interested to see what I don't know what to think. We've already gotten what Travis Gibson from the Jaguars. We don't
Mhm.
really consider that a valuable pickup. I
Right.
don't know if you have any takes on, if this guy was given up for a reason, or if you genuinely think he'll be a
No,
contributor.
I honestly, I think it's a veteran body who's gonna be assignment sound. And I think that's kind of, you're not getting a dynamic player for a 6 round pick, right? You're getting someone who I equate him to, say, and this is going to sound funny at first, but like why you would sign a Laken Tomlinson. It's a player that is not going to be a dynamic athlete at this point in his career, is not going to flash a ton, but you're hoping his experience allows him to not make mistakes. And so, if he's in there and he's not making mistakes, he's assignment sound. At minimum, you don't have gaping holes in the offense or in the defensive line, right? That sort of thing, I think, is what it's when you listen to Coach McDonald speak, he wants, I think he was excited about the talent and the physicality and some of the other things this defense had at the beginning of the year. And it sounds now more like he's so frustrated. He wants players that are going to be in the right place, and so the scheme can work, and then we can start to add some of those athletes in later. And so when you see a player, in my opinion, like a Robertson Harris acquired, it's because he's, as you pointed out, he's unhappy with some of the choices that some of those players are making in the moment, and they're not in the right places at the right time. He is still, 19 career sacks from a defensive tackle or an interior defensive player is not bad, right? I think it was something like 23 tackles for loss, something like that over the course of his career. He's not going to be an impact player, but say Byron Murphy goes down again. right? You have a player now who you're not dropping off a cliff at that point in time. I think it was a smart move. Round 6, round 7, you can get those back if you need to down the road. If you feel like you need to get it back. Um, Not to jump ahead to the game, and I know we'll get to it, but I am excited that having that front 7 healthy, especially Leonard Williams, the combination of Leonard Williams, Boye Mafe, Derek Hall, it the only way you're going to stop Atlanta really is to try to get to the quarterback. And I know Kirk Cousins has a quick release. They do a lot of things, but if he's not able to have time, your safety play is going to matter a little bit less, right? They're not going to be able to get deep into those patterns. It's not going to be, Drake London's not going to be able to go all the way down the field. They might get some short passes, but being able to get pressure is going to be key in this game. And so getting those guys back to me is big. I am scared, list though, of the backups in this secondary. If Reek Woolen and Trey Brown are out, you're talking about D. Williams and Nehemiah Pritchett likely as your outside corners. So a talented but green, super young, super raw rookie corner on one side, and on the other side, basically a return guy who might be an okay corner who was an undrafted free agent. Those are your outside corners. Now, do they do something different with Witherspoon and play him outside and then maybe play Kobe Bryant inside or something? I don't know, but it's going to be there's the potential for it to be really ugly in this game.
Yeah, we'll get into the game here,
Yes.
but I think it can be ugly in multiple ways. But let's just sort of evaluate where this team is.
Yep.
As a whole, this team has frankly underperformed. Now, I think it's interesting though, because there are several ways to look at where the Seahawks right now are. The
Mm-hmm.
reality is they're still 3-3 and they're tied for first in the division.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the caveat is that's due to a somewhat favorable schedule to start. And so you question how much is real, how much is not. But the reality is the level of panic that I think myself, as well as most Seahawk fans right now feel, it can be a little overrated, perhaps. I think it's also very important to consider that this team played 3 games in 10 days. And I don't think that that gets enough attention. I don't think that when you're talking about issues that are showing up on film, I think it's very underestimated how lack of time there is to truly fix that. There's not, I mean, they're doing walkthroughs and I've been doing full padded practices, and you're talking about some really important attention to detail issues that are coming up consistently. You've got to dedicate time to fix that, and that's literally the opposite of what they've had.
Right.
Um, so that's something that I think also needs to be taken into account. And then finally, I think if the wins and losses had gone differently, if they'd lost 2 in a row instead of 3 in a row, I also think most people had this team 3-3 at this point of the season. Like
Mm-hmm.
if you looked at the schedule, a lot of people kind of counted Miami as a loss. Probably what you would do is you switch the losses with Miami and the Giants,
Yep.
right? So record wise, I don't think the expectations are that far off. I think people got so excited, and myself included, in what we saw in weeks 1 and 2, and then the expectations shot through the roof of this now being an elite defense, and now we're not seeing, in some ways, even a competent defense. But I was surprised that the Seahawks are not. They on film sometimes they look as bad as previous Seahawks defenses, but they're not. And I know it's one of the biggest frustrations that I'm hearing circulate around the fan base, the media, is just that these are the same issues. And in some ways they are, and in other ways they're not. So it's not the exact same type of issue. Right now, the Seahawks rank 18th in total defensive DVOA. It's
Mm-hmm.
actually not as bad as I expected, frankly, with the way they've been looking. And like you said, the past 3 games have been getting all these yards. I still very much so expected them to be the bottom of the barrel. Now, the question is this just where they are, or is this a nosedive type of a situation? And, only time will tell, and it can go either way.
Mm-hmm.
But even if they end up staying around this level, I think their run defense is ranked at 19th DVOA. pass defense ranked around 17th. They stayed kind of, a little bit lower the middle of the pack. That would still be a massive improvement from 30th and 31st. And you
Mhm.
would still say that the Mike McDonald venture was a worthy one and that they would build from here. The
Right,
question is, can they at least just sustain where they are?
right.
And it's going to be frustrating to watch on film because we know what the defense could be.
Mhm.
I think also, I mean, it's been mentioned before, but it took Mike McDonald a while to get the defense right under the Ravens, and so
Mhm.
they were, I think, 23rd or something like that in DVOA by week 8. We're in week 6, and they're 19th. So I still think right now where we are, as much as it's really easy to almost, I mean, I tweeted out in the middle of the game, blow it up, right? I'm like, this team looks terrible, blow the entire thing up. But when you really take a step back and look at it, things aren't as bad as they might feel.
Right.
What say you?
So I look at it from two levels. I'm looking at it from where like the state of the team right now, and I'm also starting to ask questions about, more of the future of this team and what does it these first 6 games mean, you know, moving way forward, as in like 2025 and on. My So my first thought, as far as what you said, is yeah, I think the team is slightly below average defensively based on the numbers, but you're doing this without, with some really major injuries across the defense, not just one guy either. If Mafe goes out, yes, it's a huge deal, right? If Woolen goes out, it's a huge deal. But losing Mafe and Leonard Williams and Derek Hall, right, at various times, but having two of those three out most of these last 3 games is really hard to deal with, right? And even if they do come back, if they're nicked up or they're just trying to get back, they're not at 100%. Um, Woolen being hurt is he's been kind of off and on hurt. It has a huge impact. He's really difficult to replace. And yet this team is still playing decent defense. I also think this offense has the potential to be good enough that what they need to at least make the playoffs maybe is an average defense and a little bit more competent play along the offensive line. And so I don't this like you said, this team is tied for first place in the NFC West. I don't think anyone in the NFC West is going to run away with it. I know the Niners have looked pretty good as of late. I do not believe that they are that much better than the Seahawks. And one injury or, the one game not swinging their way could make a huge difference. Also, we don't talk about it much anymore, but introducing a brand new scheme takes time, right? It takes time for that scheme to take hold. And we talked a lot about when you're on defense, you want your players to be able to just play and not have to think, right? That's something Coach McDonald has talked about wanting as well. And, whether he's designed a defense where you don't have to think or not, it still takes time. You don't see a coordinator come in, implement a brand new scheme and have it take hold immediately. And so I think there's some of that too. I'll also say the last thing on the immediate is the lack of quality amongst the off-ball linebackers is showing, right? So if Dotson and Baker are okay players, but not great, and your strong safety or safety that's playing closer to the line of scrimmage is Rayshawn Jenkins, who's not tackling well, as you said, that's just a whole level of your defense that's just really not quality, right? And then you look at compared to the Ravens, where he had Patrick Queen and Roquan Smith and Kyle Hamilton. That's where his superstars were outside of Matabwike. And they don't have that here. So I do think that they're on the right. So here's what I'm getting to long term. A couple questions I asked myself and thought about before today's Seahawks 360. First question was, can the Seahawks win a Super Bowl with this team? Right. And I ask that because I think you have to distinguish, are you trying to win a Super Bowl or are you trying to make the playoffs? And is the organization trying to make money each year? And this is a question that they ask about the Mariners all the time. Are you trying to make the playoffs and be profitable, or are you trying to win a World Series? And so with this version of the Seahawks, the 2024 Seahawks, I ask you, do you think they are trying to win a Super Bowl this year, or do you think they are trying to get better?
I think they want playoffs. I think they do have a specific goal in mind. I don't think it's the Super Bowl. I think they want to get back to the playoffs. I'm not even
Mm-hmm.
sure they expect to win in the playoffs, but I think they feel they have because they said they underperformed last year, right? Where they were 9-8 and they missed the playoffs barely. I think making the playoffs at least and being competitive,
Mm-hmm.
perhaps in a playoff game, would
Mm-hmm.
be enough for this team, front office to feel like they made a step in the right direction.
Okay. I I'm always so I think football is different than some other sports. I've always been of the opinion if you don't think you're close to a Super Bowl, not necessarily this year, but say in a year or two, then you got to get rid of the pieces that where you can improve, right? And move forward. So my next question, and I don't know, I do happen to think that this team has an outside shot at going really deep into the playoffs in 25 and in 26 if they add more talent to the defense, if they fix the offensive line, if Coach McDonald can clean up the assignment misses, right? Next question was that I wrote down was, is this version of the Seahawks, if this version of the Seahawks isn't winning a Super Bowl, should we continue with Geno Smith? And that's a 2025 question. But because I think he's 34 years old, is are you trying to just progress slowly, knowing that you might be a Super Bowl contender when Geno Smith is 36, 37 years old? Or do you want to start anew with a quarterback so that that quarterback is reaching their peak when you think you're a Super Bowl contender? I don't know the answer to that question, but I think at this point in this season I think we're at a crossroads. You Seahawks lose to the Falcons in this game. The Seahawks play Buffalo at home, right? You go to 3-5, 3-6 if you lose to the Rams, 3-7 if you lose to the Niners. You have to start asking these questions. I guess I'm asking them a little prematurely, but I do wonder is what should they be thinking long term, given where this team is at?
I think, and I think regardless, they got to ride out the Geno train.
Mm-hmm.
Frankly, because they don't have a ton of other options.
For sure.
And because I'm a strong believer in if you're going to go get a young quarterback, he needs a team to support around him.
Mm-hmm.
And so whether you're going to blow it up or whether you're going to make a playoff push,
Mm-hmm.
I think either way, you got some really young talent that's going to be due to be paid soon.
Right.
Reek Woolen,
Right.
Devin Witherspoon's got a little bit, but not too long. We were already talking about DK Metcalf. So we've got
Boye
a lot of
Mafe.
young talent that you're going to have to put money in if you want to keep those pieces.
Yep.
Pieces that I think, regardless, are worthy of building around.
Right.
And so I
Mafe is going to
think
get a huge contract.
so.
Mafe is getting a huge contract.
But yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, like there's young talent that you've got to seriously think about. You've got to pay,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think more than anything, you'll probably see a lot of roster turnover from the sense of your guys like Jaron Reed. There are some other guys, maybe even young players like Mike Morris, that might not be fit
Right.
moving forward.
Right.
You're going to see some turnover, but I think it's an odd place to be. But I think you've got to continue to build the best possible team and then
Mm-hmm.
see where the chips fall. Because either way, I think you're not really rebuilding if
Right.
you're rebuilding because you got to pay, you got to put money into these young pieces in the next 2, 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
You might as well keep what you know is a fairly high floor
Mm-hmm.
at the quarterback position so that you can evaluate the talent moving forward. Because if you go get a young quarterback, it's one of the things that reasons why they moved on from Bryce Young so early is that they couldn't evaluate the team because the quarterback play was so poor. You have to have a floor for that. I think Geno definitely gives you that. I think he gives you more than that. But I think at the very least, if you're talking about an aging Geno, I think he still gives you the ability to evaluate your team and decide what you want moving forward. So I don't see a scenario where in the next 2, 3 years where it's going to be better to move on from Geno.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if we end up having a generational quarterback class or something like that that comes out in year 2 or 3,
Mm-hmm.
maybe we can revisit the discussion. But for
Right.
the time being, and until that, and frankly, I'm a little the generational quarterback class seems to like it's a little overplayed anyway. Look at Trevor Lawrence in his class. It's not
Sure.
looking great. So anyway, I just think at this point, keep doing what they're doing, right? I'm not sure as much as in the moment, I'm like blow it all up. I think they do have some good pieces
Mhm.
um that they're gonna have to build around.
I agree. I am asking the question because I think, if your team is not successful, you have to start asking what can they do differently.
Mhm.
I think a 36-year-old Gino is still, because his game's not predicated on athleticism. His game is predicated on having a sharp mind and being able to be accurate, right, with his arm. And we saw that's how Tom Brady played, right? Tom Brady was not an athlete. Tom is an athlete, quote unquote, but was not athletic in the way like a Michael Vick or someone like that. He played. He was smart and he was accurate, is what it came down to. And Geno Smith is similar, has similar traits in that sense. Not obviously not Tom Brady, but and I also think Geno Smith being present for the next couple of years allows the team to identify a young quarterback, have them sit for a year,
Yes.
and still maintain the win. Maintain the winning culture, because I think that is important to the ownership group, or to the ownership, that is important to Coach McDonald, is to establish a winning culture, right? To learn what it's like to win, to expect to win. And so tanking, or, say playing Sam Howell for 6 games does not allow you to do that. So I just asked the question because I think when your team is 3-3 and it looks like the team could be a lot worse in 3-4 weeks, you're going to start to hear those questions. But the other question I asked was, what's missing from this team to help them be, how could they have been better, or how can they be better? Not just this year, but moving forward. What could have made this into a Super Bowl contending team in 24? I think the health of the front seven sucked, or has sucked, right? And when you have those players hurt as much as they have been, it's really difficult to play consistent defense. I think the O line is trash.
Yeah.
I feel very comfortable saying at this point in time, I don't know what they have in Christian Haynes. I'm hopeful that Christian Haynes is a starting guard. I know that Charles Cross is at minimum, an above average left tackle. That's a huge thing. The rest of the guys can go play somewhere else, as far as I'm concerned.
I don't think they would play anywhere
That
else. Is
that O
probably the
line
truth.
is the number one reason why, even if the defense hasn't been great, that O line is the reason why this team isn't better.
Yep.
Period. Period.
Agreed.
It's and it's really frustrating, right? It is a different regime, or a different coaching staff. It is a different year, but we haven't had a dominant offensive line in so long, this team. And I don't know if it's a John Schneider thing, or it's difficult to rebuild an offensive line in a year. But whatever the case is, they've got to draft 3 guys, they've got to sign 2 guys. These guys got to go.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating, right? It's frustrating to. I know we've gone round and round about George Fant, and George Fant is at best, in his best case scenario, is a swing tackle who gives you quality off the bench. He was our starting right tackle going into the year because of Abe Lucas's health. But I'm not a doctor, but I could have told you Abe Lucas wasn't playing. I said that from the beginning, and they still went into this season. He was potentially their second best offensive lineman, and you knew he wasn't going to be there. You signed Laken Tomlinson, who's a stiff, right? You got Bradford, who's a stiff. You went and got Connor Williams. Well, what good is Connor Williams if the guards on either side, should be working on the street? Like, it's maddening to me. And so for me, that's step one, is you got to rebuild the offensive line. I think you really do have to replace Dodson, Baker, Jenkins in some form. You might keep one of them. I actually think Dodson's pretty good. Maybe you re-sign him. You let Knight start next season, and you find yourself a pretty good safety to be next to Julian Love. But that's got to get better, because right now it's not that good. Right now it's a hole. And then the players have to get more comfortable in the schemes. But I guess what I'm getting at is, I don't think this team is that far away from being a perennial NFC West champion, but you're not winning anything at any level with the trash offensive line. And that's what's really keep holding this team back. I feel bad for Gino. I feel bad for DK. I feel bad for K9. Like these are skilled, above average NFL players who I think could be all pros if the offensive line gave them time and created holes as they're supposed to. But facts of the matter is they're not going anywhere until that gets fixed.
Yeah, no, for sure. I definitely agree with that. I think we still disagree on the real options they had at right tackle because I just don't see them other than the draft. And if you were going to sacrifice the draft, then your defense was going to be way worse off than it is right now. So,
You
I mean, in
signed
terms of
Michael and
drafting
Way and
high,
Way un whatever the big massive right tackle from the New England Patriots out of Michigan. I can't pronounce his name right now, but you sign him. His contract wasn't even that big. You go and sign him
you
to
said the
play
right
right
tackle out of.
Michigan. But if he was, and he can play guard too. And so and he's very good. Now, Abe Lucas is healthy, you put him in at guard. Abe Lucas is hurt, you put him at tackle. My point was, I wanted to see them put, if it's me and I'm building a team, I know this isn't Madden, but I'm putting a lot more resources into the offensive and defensive lines than most teams do, right? And I think he put a lot of resources, obviously, a lot of resources in the D line, but that offensive line needs help. That's the
I
point.
agree. I
That's
just
the
I
whole
just
point I'm
think they
making.
were limited in how many moves you can only make so many moves in one offseason. That's the reality. And so I give them a little grace because they made a step forward. And we were all excited about the offensive line too. So like that's the other thing. I think it's really easy
True.
to look at it now and be like, oh well, they
True.
did a poor job. But the reality is everyone was excited about the infusion of youth and depth at the offensive line position. And I
Yep.
think people don't talk about that enough. I think they made some good swings. I mean, even still holding these guys now, if they are healthy scratches, means they're still looking to invest. That gives me the optimism that they'll make the right moves moving forward next season when they do, when it is going to be top line priority. You don't have to, it's great if you can infuse a ton of young upper echelon talented guys at both the defensive line and the offensive line. But the reality is that typically takes you have to pick one and
For
you have
sure.
to do one each year because you only get so many first round picks, second round picks. Like that's where we are, right?
So
I expect them to be better this upcoming offseason.
yes, I agree. And typically it is one line or the other. Onwenu signed a 3-year, $57 million contract extension with the Patriots. So it's almost $20 million
Extension, but he
a year.
was already on that team.
But he was a free agent or a restricted free agent, I believe. Um,
That those guys
well,
are
but he started his first 4 games at right tackle this season. He's played right guard this season. In 22, he was the PFF's number 4 ranked guard in the NFL.
I'm not saying that.
I'm saying if this player was available, who's able to play both,
But he's not really if he's a restricted
well,
or I would even say you're at a disadvantage when you're trying to pull somebody, especially that young, off a team. I don't think it's as feasible as you just look at paper and say, oh yeah, go get that guy. I mean, you're talking about bringing somebody all the way across coast. I just think there are other factors involved that's not as simple as, oh yeah, go
it's
get him.
not. No, 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 it's not. But we're gonna argue the
George
same.
Fant was the best right tackle available on the market. All the other tackles, go back and look at free agency, were left tackles. They were all left tackles.
Okay, but you can, just because you're labeled a left tackle does not mean you can't play right tackle. A lot
But
of
you're paying a
tackles.
lot of money to pay somebody out of position, and I don't think that's a wise use of resources.
It it is if your team can't go anywhere without it. That's my point. I don't care if you have to overpay.
I think going into this offseason, as questionable as tackle was, you had zero guards.
Uh-huh.
You had zero guards. That's the reality of the
I agree.
situation. You had zero guards. So if you had to prioritize something, I think the best thing you can criticize the team for is they really had Anthony Bradford and literally no one else, and came away with Anthony Bradford and a bunch of dudes who would frankly be far better with the Damian Lewis. It was better last year with Damian Lewis, and it had issues, but the issues were again the health on the tackles end. I think you definitely downgraded that. There's no question. You significantly downgraded at left guard. And you're feeling the effects of that right now. Um, and I think it affects your whole team. I think if you have Damian Lewis and Connor Williams, and then you're going back and forth in this rotation with Bradford Haynes, man,
Mhm.
are you just a thousand better, 1,000 times better off. But either way, we agree. Offensive line trash. I
Yes.
give them a little grace on how we got here because I think injuries play a really big part. I also think that, frankly, some of these players, I do think they just thought higher of them. I probably thought higher of Anthony Bradford than they should have. I didn't
Yep.
have a particularly high opinion of him going out of last year, but I'll give them a little grace for that. I do
I
want
think
to go
they
back to
expected.
something though, in terms of players who uh are worth looking at moving forward. You mentioned Dotson as one of them. I would
Mhm.
agree, and I want to go back, switching to the defense just really quickly in
Mhm.
terms of where we are because that's the most heavily criticized side of the ball. They both struggled, frankly, but I think everybody understands the offensive line situation, and
Mhm.
that coaching is a real problem, or not problem, but it has shown itself to be a problem
Mhm.
early in the year. But before we come back to the coaching, Dotson and Baker actually, a lot of times it seems like they're struggling to learn the system
Mhm.
and how to play off one another. And one of the things, this is Seahawks 360, one of the things that I just don't think is acknowledged is that Baker nor Dotson had to learn a new system. They played for the same team their entire careers
The
until
Bills and
now.
Dolphins. Mhm.
This is the very first time that both of these guys have switched teams, and Baker didn't play at all in the offseason. We talked
Mhm.
about that, right? Like he just didn't play. He was too injury prone. Dotson was out there sometimes. He missed a significant chunk of the offseason as well. And I just think you see two guys playing catch up out there on the field. You
Mhm.
see guys going in multiple gaps and like multiple dudes in the same gap. You see miscommunications between the two guys. And yeah, they said they were working on stuff on and off the field, but they had to cram that because they genuinely didn't have until maybe 2 weeks before the season before they were even both available.
Right.
And I think that's not talked about enough. I'm not sure that both guys can't be capable in this system. I just don't think that they understand the system, and I think on film, it is clear. Now, could you point to coaching? Absolutely, and I'm open to that possibility, but I also just wanna people to understand the uphill battle that, frankly, the second level is dealing with. I mean, they didn't have a ton of depth at that position regardless. It was all a point of contention, but here we are. They didn't get anybody else. They leaned on those two guys. Now, I think you can argue that that was a big mistake, leaning on two guys that you've seen it throughout the offseason, didn't have any training reps.
Mhm.
I understand that they saw the they were part of the discussions on paper, but I don't think any defense is an on paper scheme, right? Like you have to get those reps, you have to practice those situations, you have to practice those scenarios, and they just didn't do that. So I would like to point out that I really would like to see. I'm curious, even though the competition will be stronger, I'm interested to see the mentals become better at the
Mhm.
second level because they look lost out there. And I'm not sure that that's an indictment on Mike McDonald in and of itself.
Right. Yeah, and a lot of these players haven't played with one another
Right.
much. Leonard Williams was acquired during the season, right? Byron Murphy is a rookie. Jonathan Hankins is the first year with the Seahawks. All the linebackers, it's their first year. You know, Rayshawn Jenkins, it's his first year with the team. All those guys have big run responsibilities, and so there's no experience playing with one another, as well as no experience playing in this defense. And so, it makes me, as we talk about it, it makes me think more and more. I assume that they came into this season wanting Coach McDonald to get entrenched, right? To figure out what it's like to be an NFL head coach. to, implement his defense. That was going to take time. And they knew that they were going to have a pretty talented offense. And if they happen to make the playoffs and happen to make a playoff run, that's great. But I don't realistically, I have to assume that they knew that they weren't going to be the most competitive team this year, and that next year or 26 would be more of, now you've got players who are, Witherspoon is 2 years in this defense, and Coach McDonald knows exactly what he can and can't do. He isn't Kyle Hamilton. He's potentially better, but that doesn't mean you line him up in the same way you lined up Kyle Hamilton. He needs something different, right? Your strength of your team may not be those linebackers like Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen. It might be your D line, but how do you utilize that, right, to your and utilize it to the best of your advantage? And I just think that it's going to take time, and that's the realization I'm starting to come to is it's just not that easy, right? It's not that easy to come in unless you're taking over a ready-made. This isn't Barry Switzer taking over Jimmy Johnson's Dallas Cowboys, right? It's very different than that. And we have to be patient with it and try to see the positives that are happening. And, I saw things on Twitter talking about like we need Pete Carroll back and Mike McDonald is trash and why did we hire him? Like we are what, 6 games in, and this team has flashed some really amazing things and has been hurt. You got to give them a year. You got to give them time. So it's interesting though. It takes, I think, stepping away. And for me, the exercise of typing those questions down about, what's missing from this team. Can this team win a Super Bowl? Is Geno Smith going to be around? And asking the questions, and sometimes the answer is yes, and sometimes it's no. And it helps me to make a more clear, I think, opinion of what's going on with this team by being able to step away and not just looking at, okay, this happened in the Giants game, this happened in the Niners game, this is the preview for the Falcons. It's good to drill down, but we're not getting a big picture assessment or an accurate one if we don't step back every once in a while.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of that, we've talked around it, but I want to spend a little bit of time on the coaching because I do think that has manifested itself, especially as the competition has gotten better. You've seen the gap, I think, in coaching. Do you still, I asked you before, would you, if they lost the 49ers game, would you fall off the bandwagon? You said no.
Mhm.
Um, and not necessarily do you fall off the bandwagon, but do you believe that this coaching staff, um, on offense, defense, and special teams
Mhm.
at the heads, the guys at the heads.
Mhm.
Do you believe that is a formula for success moving forward?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's hard, I think, to judge a special teams coach uh, unless that team's giving up a ton of returns or block punts. Um, so I'm going to leave that for the people who know how to study film better on special teams. But we saw Chenault with a kick return for a touchdown. That's a good result, right? Defensively, I think the defense is you judge Coach McDonald when you talk about the defense because you might have a defensive coordinator, but the reality is Coach McDonald is calling the shots. And yes, absolutely. I think his resume speaks for itself. What he's going to learn, hopefully what he's learning now. And I think a lot of us have gone through this. When you go from managing a portion of a team, whether it's your own job or sports, to being the CEO and managing the whole team, it's more difficult to leave your fingerprints on a unit, right? To leave for him to coach a defense and be the CEO, can he manage those two things in a way that he's effective? I don't know how to judge that. I'm not sure yet. But that's not an easy transition to make. Offensively, I think that the big one is Ryan Grubb, right? The big one is the offense. We talked about the 9 rushing attempts against the Lions. I think he's figuring it out. I also think he's pretty brilliant. And the number of teams that were going after him, pro and college, during the offseason, I think speaks to how he's regarded within the football community. I think that he is it's interesting because he's not as level-headed as I expected him to be. What I mean by that is, I think you're on tilt when you have 9 rushing attempts in the game, right? I think you're on tilt at that point. Unless you're Jerry Glanville and you're running the original run and shoot, or June Jones, it's you're on tilt a little bit. You're not focused enough, right? You're not thinking in a level-headed manner. And I think it's going to take him time to get to a place where he's comfortable enough to stick to his guns and stick to his game plan. I loved what Coach Holmgren used to do and Bill Walsh used to do when they would chart their first 15 plays of the game offensively, and they ran them regardless of situation. And it was a way to get into a rhythm and a way to stick to what they believed in. And I think that will come with time with Coach Grubb. And I think he's incredibly innovative. So the innovation is there, and the players are excited to play for him. The next step is the play calling needs to be consistent, balanced, appropriate, and appropriate to the personnel that you have. Like, yes, I want him to run, I want him to run the ball more. And I think running the ball, I've said this before, running the ball gives your offensive line confidence if they can do it decently. Maybe he just is saying to himself, my offensive line is so bad that we can't run the ball. That might actually be what he's thinking. I don't know. But that would be the one question I have is getting Coach Grubb to a place where he's consistent in his play calling. The balance is there regardless of what's going on in the game situation. I don't have worries about this defense. I think, as we said, it takes time, and there have been tons of injuries. So yes, if you're asking me, is this the right group of coaches? 100%. Now, do they need a different offensive line coach instead of Scott Huff that they brought from UW? Maybe. Do they need a different, linebackers coach, or, I'm not even sure who that is. Some of those position coaches, maybe those need to change, but scheme wise, the process is the correct one. We just haven't gotten the result.
I think I agree with you on 2 out of 3.
What's the third?
Jay Harbaugh can go. I mean,
But what mistake? What do you see?
I I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in special teams, but D. Williams alone,
Mhm.
and how confused he seems to be. He seems to be very inconsistent in his process. I think he's sort of winging it. And he looks like he's winging it, and the results show he's winging it. I think that, frankly, I was always a little bit nervous about you know, going from college to NFL in 2 phases of the game.
Mhm.
I would have just preferred for it to be Grubb. I would just feel better with someone with NFL experience. They've already changed a lot of things with special teams. So you're coming in from college and you're dealing with that. So I'm not saying it's an indictment on Jay Harbaugh as a special teams coach. I personally would just prefer a little bit more NFL experience in the room. I think you can get that on special teams. They're pretty bottom tier in terms of, I mean, you're not outside of the touchdown. You're really not seeing consistent coverages. I think the offense gets backed pinned down inside the 10 way more frequently than they ever
Mhm.
did. And I will say Larry Izzo was, I think, a truly very good special teams coach. I think he's doing pretty well over there with the Washington Commanders.
Mhm.
And they're looking pretty good right now. But I would just like to get some NFL experience for one, given all of the changes. And I think that things could be a lot better, particularly from a coverage perspective. There seems to be something that's a little missing, a little off. I'm not even just talking about the miscues with the blocked field goal and stuff. I mean, I think that's apparent, but I just think you sort of see the inexperience in that area, and I think that's just the area that you can't afford to have it inexperience. I don't think the upside on special teams is worth it, frankly.
Mhm.
Um, I just don't. Like, I just think you need a solid unit. If it's average, cool, right? Like, you just need to not be a liability. I don't think the upside of unlike Grub, right? The the bumps and bruises you go through have really immense upside for the team. It's just not the same on
I
special.
would argue that everyone all the special teams coaches, it's basically a brand new job because the kickoff has changed so much. And so some of those failures and successes are just not random, but I think they all started in the same place. I don't see the same holes. What the one thing that I do agree with completely is you have Laviska Shenault on this team, mostly to be a return guy because he's not contributing a ton in the passing game. And so why is it D Williams back there instead of Chenault, right? That bothers me a ton. It also bothers me that, it used to be that if you were returning a punt and you were backed up, that you stood on the 10-yard line. And if the ball came to you at the 10 in the air, typically you fair caught it, but the 10-yard line was the cutoff. You do not drift behind the 10-yard line. If it's past the 10, you let it go, right? Because you're either going to get tackled or it's going to roll into the end zone. And I don't see those teachings. I don't see it across the NFL, but especially with the Seahawks, that's something that needs to be there. Sometimes I think players take it upon themselves to catch the ball, but you got to let that ball go. The play where they got the field goal blocked, it's just hard for me to distinguish between, is it coaching? Is it a player not thinking, right? Is it scheme or is it the player? And it's hard to place blame. I want to give him a year or two to establish himself. To me, that's not my worry. I think special teams coaches come and go all the time. And to your point, they don't make that much of a difference unless they make huge, crucial mistakes.
Well, that's what's been happening though.
The field goal was. I don't know if there are any others that
The
I can point
fumbles
to.
have been pretty. Yeah, there's been quite a bit of special teams miscues, in my opinion. Even if they haven't resulted in a direct turnover, I think the offense has been put in poor positions repeatedly because of special teams
And you think
miscues
a better
one way or
coach,
the other.
you think a different coach would change that?
I do
Okay.
actually, because think about it. Wasn't a ton. I mean, we talk about this team cohesively being the same.
Mhm.
It's I think a lot of that applies for the special team. And yes, I know the kickoff rules change, but I do think there are some fundamental NFL things that just sort of give you a floor, right? I'm looking for a floor,
Sure.
and I think you can find a better floor. That's all I want. Is I want some fundamentals to be ingrained in the special teams, just so they're not costing you as much. I think the special teams is really, it's not talked about. They've been really poor. When you're struggling as an offensive line the way they are, I mean, that's how Pete Carroll won games, but people never talked about how good the special teams units were. But
Sure.
they sometimes made a really big difference in terms of when the offense was struggling and they had good field position. And it's not like
Sure.
they made a ton of amazing plays. They didn't. We all saw DJ what is his name? DJ Dallas back
Mm.
there.
Right.
It's not like they made a ton of game-changing plays. It's just that they were assignment sound. They didn't make mistakes. And
Mhm.
again, that's my number one thing. I need my special teams not to make mistakes. Give me a coach in here who will make sure that the team isn't
Well,
regular mistakes.
so the other thing I'll say is I think the lack of discipline with assignments we're seeing across the board with this team. And that becomes a head coach problem, right? And I know he's trying to address it, but coming into the season, my expectation was that was going to get cleaned up, that was like the number one priority. That is like what Mike McDonald hangs his hat on is we are going to be smart. We're going to be assignment sound and we're going to go from there. DK Metcalf, we didn't talk about it yet, but Metcalf rounding out his dig route against the Giants, resulting in the interception, or against the Niners, resulting in the interception, was on DK. That wasn't on Geno. And they're trying to kind of dance around it a little bit, within the organization and in the press conferences. Everybody who evaluated that play said that's on DK, period.
Yeah, even in real time,
Period.
I
That
saw
is
I thought
not on Geno, right? And that's a mental mistake, right? That if we're saying that Jay Harbaugh's fault with the some of those mistakes on special teams, that's a mistake you attribute in part to the wide receivers coach and Ryan Grubb. Defensively, tons of mistakes with the second level run fits, right? We knew that before coach said it. You could see it. The minute they got through that defensive line, they could go anywhere they wanted.
that.
So mental mistakes there, mental mistakes on special teams. This is without those mistakes, this team is 4-2, 5-1.
Oh,
My
for sure.
issue, my issue with it is that this was supposed to be something that Coach McDonald was not tolerant of, and that was going to go away. This was going to be a more disciplined, different type of team under Coach McDonald than it was under Pete Carroll. And the reality is there are still tons of mental mistakes. Now, he needs time to clean them up, right? But those on top of injuries, right? Those are really plaguing this team across the board, all three phases.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I definitely agree. Again, I just have more tolerance for it with the upside of a Mike McDonald mistake, upside of the Ryan Grubb mistakes. You got to have a floor somewhere.
Hey,
Really.
dude has look at dude's last name. As far as I'm concerned, there's upside. I just look at his last name and I say there's upside.
In special teams, it's not.
John Harbaugh was hired to be the Ravens head coach as a special teams coordinator. Mike Tomlin was hired. Was he a position coach or a special teams coordinator? Mike Tomlin.
I thought he was
I
a
don't
position
remember. He
coach.
might have been
I
a
was gonna say
cornerbacks coach or something, or
linebacker,
like
but
a
I could
secondary
also be
coach.
making that up.
But my point is, I think I give him time. I'm happy to give him time. I think the
I mean, but do
mistakes.
you want him to take over as head coach? I mean, I get your point that special teams coordinators can ultimately become good head coaches, but unless you're looking at him taking over Mike McDonald, I
I
don't see
don't
the
think
upside.
he's. I just don't think he's the problem. I don't think he's the problem. I think the problem is there, and the point is that there are mental mistakes across the board. The only thing I take issue with, um, Jay Harbaugh is get D Williams out of there, put Laviska Shenault in there,
And
right?
we'll see how you feel
Or
in
put
3 weeks. I think
or
you'll
put Kenny
see.
McIntosh. Kenny McIntosh is explosive. Put him back there to return as a kick returner, right?
Yeah, I do think they need to make a
Something
change.
like
I
that. The
don't
other thing
see.
is D Williams, if you're not going to play him at corner, is taking up a spot as a
Yeah,
primary kick returner.
I completely
That's a
agree with you
roster
on that.
spot.
I don't get his point in being on the team. Frankly, at this point, I think he's done more than enough to lose his spot.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah,
Tomlin was a D
it's not
coordinator.
that. I'm just not patient with special teams. I expect a level of like be mediocre, and that's fine with me. But I think I will say this: when it comes to the assignments, not a film connoisseur, won't pretend to be.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of the more often than not, assignment sound issues seem to be coming from the second level, and I just talked about that.
Mm-hmm.
I think your biggest issues from a safety perspective are tackling angles and Rayshawn Jenkins with
Mm-hmm.
those tackling angles in particular seems to be in a bad spot often. That might not have been a good pickup. Um, and maybe it is coaching in the safety world, but I just don't see as many missed assignments on the safeties as much as they just need like missed tackles, right? So for me, that's what gives me the upside on the there. They do need to work out that second level stuff. But we all it seems like the team we thought this was preseason to some extent seems to be playing itself out. Now you're still seeing brilliant flashes, I think, on both sides of the ball. I think you're still seeing the potential of the team. I think we didn't acknowledge in the preseason as much the downsides of the realities and the time, like you said, that it takes to really put the team together to be a cohesive unit for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think that the linebackers we saw were a problem. They are. I think we saw the safeties as potentially a problem, but I think we felt a little bit better about it, but it's still a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And the offensive line, which I think clearly everyone saw is the biggest flaw on this team. And it has been beyond that at
Mm-hmm.
this point as a liability for both sides of the ball somehow.
Right.
But outside of that, I think those 3 areas that you can address in the
Right.
offseason.
Right.
And I think the rest of the things will work themselves out. It might get really ugly from here, but I feel my resolve will be the same.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
The the thing is too, offensive line, if we say we knew coming in, as you said, offensive line, off-ball linebacker, strong safety, those are the three areas in question, right?
right.
Off-ball linebacker and safety, as we said last during the offseason, you can address those positions and you can address them inexpensively if you have
Yeah,
to, right?
yep,
And
agreed.
to me, that's a huge that's a positive that your weakness isn't quarterback. Your weakness isn't left tackle. Your weakness isn't edge play. Your weakness isn't corners. They are so talented at the most important positions in football. Now, the one place where that's expensive that they have to fix is the offensive line. But it's one area. And so I think in that sense, there's a lot to look forward to. There's a lot to be positive about. There's a very strong foundation within this organization from a talent standpoint going into 2025. But you
Hmm.
can't have, I think the problem is you can't have glaring holes. And you can patch up in, off ball linebacker, you can patch up strong safety, but they still have to be consistently decent. And I'm not sure if that means that you go out and sign folks. I don't know if it means you spend some draft capital, at those positions. I still want to see Tyrese Knight start. I want to see him play the majority of the snaps at off-ball linebacker. I think he does have some
It's fair. It's
ability.
a fair ask at this
I'm.
point. I mean,
This is going to sound really silly, but if Stone Forsythe can't play on Sunday, I'm excited. If it's Mike Jarrell, which I don't know who it's going to be, but I'm excited to see Mike Jarrell. I'm excited to see Laumea at some point, the kid out of Utah that they drafted. I want to see if one of those guys is the answer. And that happens sometimes in the NFL where you have a fifth, sixth, seventh round offensive lineman that becomes very, very good because he was given opportunity. And that would be such a huge boost, right? Say Jarrell starts and his athleticism just pops at right tackle and he becomes an average to above average right tackle for the next 4 years at a rookie salary. That'd be such a huge boost to this team, but you don't know if he is that until you let him play. I'm excited for some of those things and I want to see it happen. I think there is a ton to look forward to. I think there's a ton of reason to be excited about this team, but it's just that offensive line and some of the assignments on the defense and that strong safety position are just really bad and show up all the time. Third most, like I said, third most yards given up over the last 3 games on the ground. That's not fun football to watch. When your team's getting run over, that is not fun football to watch.
no. And let me tell you why I agree with your point. I think Tyrese Knight confirms my growing theory that this team is reluctant to play rookies.
Mm-hmm.
I just think they are, unless they have come with a really high pedigree in the case of Byron Murphy.
Mm-hmm.
I think they are reluctant to play rookies because Tyrese Knight played really solid. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, did he have some hiccups? Yes, but Tyrell Dodson and Jerome Baker have had plenty, right? Like we've seen their multiple, and we've seen it in regards to scheme. So if the question is, does he really understand what's happening around him? Maybe no, but
Right.
also it's clear that your other two linebackers don't either. But yet he gets no snaps, not even on special teams. Which also might be a mistake. I've pointed to that this coaching staff may be putting too much emphasis on practice reps and not giving enough credence to the value of in-game reps and the
Mm-hmm.
improvement that can come from in-game reps.
Mm-hmm.
And this the fact that some people just play better in games than they
Right.
do in practice.
Right.
I think that is showing itself to be a true weakness in the coaching assessment in terms of scouting, because I just don't see a world where Christian Haynes is that much worse than Anthony Bradford. And he may not be good, but like you
If
have
you
the
have
upside.
Right. If you have a below average Anthony Bradford who's almost at the end of his developmental curve, right? You basically know what you have in him.
Yeah,
And even if he does progress a little bit, he's still not even average. And
no,
you have a player who you haven't been able to assess yet, who has the potential to be above average. This year, right now, is the time to be seeing what you have. Because if Christian Haynes was a bust as a third round pick, right? You got to go get somebody else. But if you don't give him time, you don't know that he's a bust. Or the other thing is you accelerate the learning curve or the progress on the learning curve by getting him in the game. And so it's just, yeah, it is maddening. Now, it has been six games. And so, you know, I think you can ask the question more legitimately after 8, 9, 10 games, right? We get to week 11 and it's still Bradford getting rolled out there, and it's still Tomlinson getting rolled out there, and we're still trying to patch it up with Stone Forsyth, and it's not Laumea and Haynes and Jarrell. Then we have an issue. This team is sitting at, 3-7 or something like that. Then we have an issue because those players need to get out there. But I think they still think they have an opportunity and a chance to win. You're still tied for first in the NFC West. I think they're going to roll with what they think gives them the best chance to win in this moment.
I think they're wrong. I think they're wrong. I think what gives them the best chance
I
to
can't
win
disagree.
is, at least in the case of Christian Haynes. I won't speak to the others. I know they were lower level talent, but I do believe in Haynes' talent to,
Mhm.
again, at least be comparable
Right,
to Anthony Bradford with the upside of getting better.
right.
And I've seen him, even when he's played in small spurts, he's done very well in something. I think the pass protection is a question.
Mhm.
Now,
Now, it also may be that he's not ready and we don't know, we're not privy as to why, because AJ Barner's playing a lot, right? AJ Barner, we're seeing him out there quite a bit. I don't know what the snap count was in this last game, but he was present, right? I saw 88 out there a lot. There's another rookie, right? There's a rookie that we thought was going to be more raw than he is. So I don't know. I don't know if you may indeed be right that they don't want to play rookies, but it may also be, in addition to that, that some of the rookies we want to see out there just aren't quite ready to be out there yet in any capacity.
I get your point, and I probably would agree with you if it wasn't for circumstances. I think the circumstances have dictated. Again, I would say there's a reluctance to play rookies. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't seem like there's an all-out rule that we're not going to play rookies no matter what.
Right.
There seems to be a strong reluctance, though, and pretty much circumstances dictate whether rookies play or not.
Sure.
Because McDonald said that with the other. I mean, and if Baker or Dotson are healthy, they're getting all the snaps. They're not even considering rotating him in. To me, that speaks to circumstance. Okay, it's AJ Barner or it's Brady Russell. I think also
I
circumstance.
think Barner's playing over Brown though to a certain extent, right? You see Barner out there quite a bit over Farrell Brown. Farrell Brown was the free agent signee. You also see Nehemiah Pritchett playing over. He was Reek Woolen's replacement, and they could have played. You could have played Kobe Bryant at corner still. In that game, you
No, you
also could
couldn't
have
have.
played.
No, you couldn't have.
Well, I'm saying he's had experience at corner, is what I'm saying. I
But
wouldn't do
not with
it.
Mike McDonald. Mike's not
You
doing
could have
that.
played Art. You could have played Artie Burns, right? At
I,
at
it,
that corner,
he got hurt.
but not before that. I think he got hurt after that, after Woolen went out. My
Well, I
point
mean,
is,
well, in the 49ers game, right, Willen did not play, correct?
not in the Niners game.
Right. So I guess that's what I'm talking about. Barnes wasn't healthy. They brought him up for the 49ers game.
Got it. So I guess what I'm getting at though is Pritchett is playing, right? Pritchett has been out there a lot, and if
Circumstance.
yes, but circumstance with Haynes as well, and they're not playing. The circumstance is you got two
They're
phone booths.
playing him. They're
You
not
got two.
playing
You
him
got
much.
two fire hydrants playing at guard, and
They're playing him, but they're not playing him
they're
much.
not playing him all the time, right?
No.
So I think that there's always a multitude of things going on. I tend to agree with you. I'm always of the opinion if you're not winning a Super Bowl, get the player that you want to be out there for the next 5 years out there to get reps, to get better, right? If you think that's the player that's going to be there when you're going to win it all, you got to get that player out there now to accelerate their learning. I've always been of that opinion. And so if Bradford's not going to be your right guard in 3 years, and Christian Haynes is okay but not great, you tell him just don't get the quarterback killed, and we're going to get you reps so that you can get better.
Yeah, and I would say I don't necessarily agree with that philosophy. I'm team play the best guy. But in this case, I genuinely just do believe that Haynes would be better. And even if he's worse in some areas, at least he wouldn't. Bradford's done a little bit better about the penalties the past couple of games, but he still like leads the league in penalties.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, so without the penalties. Final thing.
Mhm.
I want to touch on, I know we're running a little over here before we close out. Been a ton of conversation about Geno because frankly, he had a poor game against
Mhm.
the 49ers, or he had his worst game to date. He seems to struggle most against the 49ers, and he just seems to not be able to beat those dudes. I don't know. Now, I will say, obviously, he was under siege. I mean, that's noted. I believe 17 pressures. Um, it was ridiculous. No question about it. Typically, he does a better job of navigating that pressure. Maybe
Mhm.
there's just something about the 49ers scheme that makes that impossible. Or maybe he just can't beat the 49ers. It's hard for me to say that he can't win in clutch moments,
Right.
but because he has. I mean, he's led the lead in game winning drives. But in terms of your big games, beating a contender, he's not proven he can beat a contender. Some of that is circumstantial.
Mhm.
But there is a legitimate question. I think the case is building for those who are anti-Geno that is can he take you to a Super Bowl? And for the first time, I'm questioning a little bit if he's a good, not great guy. Um, and good, not great means consistency. Because I think he can be great at times,
Mhm.
but can he be great most of the time?
Mhm.
I'm not sure. It did actually change my opinion of him a little bit. I'm not no means jumping ship, but from a long-term view, some of those mistakes were on him. Some of them weren't, but I also don't want to make the mistake of whenever something goes wrong, it's everybody else's Pagino's fault, right?
Yeah.
Like it's really easy to do that because I do think I agree with you that the interception, DK, when it was thrown, I said, what the heck was DK doing? Like
Mhm.
what kind of route was that? Was literally my question.
Right.
But there's also a case to be made that frankly he forced the ball to DK too much, and that has been a problem for the offense and the predictability of that. We wanted DK to get more involved in games, yes, but do we want it to be predictable to the point that it is? Probably not.
Could
What do you think?
that be coach? Well, first of all, the DK point, could it be coaching that they are asking him to force the ball to DK, right?
Yeah,
I
it
think
seems like it.
there is, I think that is partially the case.
It is.
Um, as far as Gino goes, long term, right? The question of what do we have in Geno Smith? Can he win the big games? Is he a Super Bowl winning type of quarterback? I think he, like most quarterbacks, not named Mahomes or Allen, need a decent offensive line and need good receivers to be great, right? We've seen Allen, we saw Brady, we've seen Mahomes be able to be great with trash receivers, right? And not a great offensive line because their greatness supersedes all of that. Geno's not that guy, but I think I think he's a top 10 quarterback in the NFL. I do. And I think that he needs DK to not make mistakes. He needs a right tackle, not named Stone Forsythe, right? Or George Fant. He needs, because I think even if the guard play is okay, I think he's still going to be pretty good. But if you only have one functioning offensive lineman and you're running for your life the whole time, that's not fair to him. I'm not judging him in these games against the Niners and the Giants. I'm not judging Geno Smith on those games. Fact of the matter is, the offensive line is too terrible. I think Geno Smith is a good piece. I do think long term with this organization, this next offseason, they're going to have to address who the quarterback is going to be in 2027, 2028. Whether it's drafting a quarterback high or trading up to be in competition for one of those big time quarterbacks, a Jalen Milroe, a Shador Sanders, somebody like that. Or if they decide Sam Howell is their guy, whatever that might be, they're going to have to make that decision, in my opinion, because Geno is getting to a place where I think he has a couple of years left, but I don't think it's three, right? I think it's one or two. Realistically, as performing at a top 10, top 12 quarterback level. But I don't think the big thing is I don't think he's the problem. I really don't. I think all quarterbacks make bad throws sometimes, and he doesn't have the same margin for error as some of the stronger arm quarterbacks might. And quite frankly, was it against the Giants where DK did the same sort of thing where his route was wrong and he gave up another interception? Whatever the case is, I think a lot of Gino, I really legitimately looking at it objectively, a lot of his mistakes are on other players. And like I said this before, I lean on some of the guys who understand film better than I do and have the time to go through it. But those are the guys who are Geno Smith's biggest fans, right? Some of these guys whose full-time jobs are to watch film. They love Geno and his decision making and his accuracy. I trust them. Geno's not the problem to me. In fact, you've got a top 10 quarterback at a salary that reflects more of a number 15 to 20 quarterback in the NFL. To me, that's a positive.
Yeah, I definitely
Fix
agree.
the
I
damn
definitely don't think
line.
he's the problem.
Fix the damn line. That's what it comes down to
Yeah,
for me. Fix the line.
he's not the problem. That wasn't really my question. I would slightly disagree with you in the sense that I don't know that this offseason can be the offseason that they focus on the future at the quarterback position. I think you got to focus on the offensive line. I think you have to prioritize that over
Yeah,
the
no,
quarterback.
not over the offensive line, not at all.
Yeah,
But
I just think one is going to come at the cost of the other because it's not a deep quarterback class. It's not even arguably not even a
no, but
good quarterback class.
if you picked a quarterback round one and you went offensive line 2 and 3 and you signed a guy, right? Or you went offensive line round 2 and you signed a guy, for a decent contract, or you signed two, or you went round 2 and 4 and picked offensive lineman and signed a guy, that's still addressing the position, in my opinion.
It is. I just don't think this is the year to do it. I feel about this year like I felt about the year that Desmond Ritter and Malik Willis and
No, no,
Will
no, 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 no
Davis.
way. No way.
Oh,
The quarterbacks are so much better in this draft than they were then. No way. Completely disagree with that.
I think I like Shador Sanders. I do, but I don't think he's anywhere near the Seahawks as an option. That's just the reality, right? So if you're talking about who's available, now if this season goes off the rails, then we're having a different conversation, and I think that's a worthy venture. But if this team ends up being a 16 or below in terms of having a draft pick, I don't know who you're getting at 16 and below that's gonna
Cam
worthy.
Ward, Grant Nussmeier out of LSU is a good quarterback, a very good quarterback. I'm not a Carson Beck fan. He's dropping a ton. I hope they don't take him. I can't stand him. I love me some Cam Ward. I think Cam Ward is an above average NFL quarterback when all is said and done. Now he might be a top 5 pick by the end of this year.
But that's what I
He's
mean. Like
playing in
those guys
Miami.
are gonna go. Like those guys are gonna go. Now the Seahawks are bad. We're having a very different conversation. I'm assuming that the Seahawks remain around 500.
Okay.
If that's the case, then I think I don't think it's worthy.
If they're close, the thing is if they think that they're close to contending, they're not going quarterback. They're not the Falcons, right? If they think if they're close to contending, they're going to say we're spending our big resources to make us better right now.
Yeah,
And
I would agree with that. I would agree
they'll
with that.
come out and say Sam Howell, we don't know yet, but he could very well be the quarterback of our future, just to placate folks.
Yeah,
What I'm saying is, but I'm also a planner, right? I like succession plans. I like to know, even at work, I like to know that the folks that I'm supervising or managing, who's coming and who's going, even if it's 3 months down the road, who's going to succeed that person there, who's going to fill this hole. I like that stuff. I think it's important. And so for me, the quarterback position is not a position I want to roll the dice on. I want to know I'm solid at this position for a long time. I also think that there is a tremendous amount of value in having a quarterback sit and learn how to be a pro, especially from a Geno Smith, right? Who's an absolute professional. Sit and learn from Geno, pick his brain, watch this team. And I think you would see a lot less transition between Geno and the next guy if it's not the year Geno leaves is the year we bring in the new dude. You know what I'm saying?
I do. Um, I also am a planner. I just think the quarterback position is particularly unique in the sense that you never know until you know. Even if a guy sits behind Geno for a year, he could still be trash. So I guess that's what I take in consideration in terms of when you want to make an investment, because whoever they pick, you've got to allow that person for 2, 3 years, right? You can't then do something else. So I guess I look at the opportunity cost of taking someone in this draft, where I would rather prefer maybe a deeper quarterback draft
And
to
I
put my
think
fingers in the pot.
I don't think there's an elite top five quarterback in this draft. I think there are a lot of very good ones. We didn't talk about Jalen Milroe. We didn't talk about Quinn Ewers. I think there are a lot of very good quarterbacks.
I'm not big on Quinn Ewers
I'm
myself.
not either. Hey, he went to Ohio State for a while. You know, I don't like him. That's not my dude.
And that's what I mean. I don't want to take a guy that's like okay, because again,
Cam
you
Ward's
have
better
to
than
invest in
Cam
him.
Ward's better than okay. Cam Ward is better than okay.
But then I don't.
Jalen
If you're right, then he's not
Jalen
going to be.
Milroe, Jalen Milroe has tremendous upside, right? I just think that I want to see them address that position sooner rather than later. And I think you can do that and build for the now if you spend your resources carefully.
Do you really think those dudes are going to be available down at 16 to 20? Because
I don't know that that's where the Seahawks are picking. That's
I
kind
think
of
because of the lack of depth, and you're right. Again, if the Seahawks have a top 10 pick, it's a different conversation. Because I think it's worthy a top 10 investment for the future. But if you're talking about after top 10 pick and the class is not that strong anyway, I think you may be able to get top 10 quality in a deeper class.
so check this out. We'll end with this. Falcons, at Falcons, Bills, Rams, at Niners, Cardinals, at Jets, across the country, at Cardinals, Packers, Vikings, at Bears, Rams. I look at that list and I don't see a single game that I can comfortably say that's a win. Now, I'm not trying to trash the team. I'm just saying I don't, you know, going to
I
Atlanta
agree
to
with you.
play on turf against that speed and those weapons is difficult.
I
Obviously,
agree.
Bills,
I
Niners,
expect
the
this team
Cardinals,
to. I expect
Cardinals
this
have
team to have some upsets. I'll admit I expect this team to. I don't think they're going to be favored in any of those games, but I'm also not sure that matters. Maybe it's just faith in Coach McDonald, um, and maybe it's faith in health and also time. But I also don't see, other than maybe the 49ers, who just seem more vulnerable than ever to me. There's also not a lot of juggernauts, and
no,
the Bills would be one, but even they
there are
have
a
their
lot of good teams there, right? The Packers are good. The Vikings are 5-0.
the
There's
Vikings are
there
five
are
and
some
oh. The Vikings are coming back down to earth. By the time
there,
we get to them, I'd be
totally
more scared of
agree.
them now
Totally
than
agree.
later.
Totally agree. But what I'm saying is I don't see any gimmies.
There's not any
And
gimmies. No, I don't think
if
there's any gimmies though.
and if there are continue to be injuries, right? Or if they don't fix some of these issues, this team may be picking higher than we think it is. That's all I'm saying.
I
I don't
agree.
want to say I don't want to say that I don't want that to happen, right? I want to see the Seahawks
Right.
win every game. But I'm trying to be realistic here and understand what we're looking at the end of this season and moving forward. And if they happen to go 6-11 or they happen to go 7-10, right? And they're trying to really assess what's next and they're picking eighth instead of picking 18th, then I think the conversation looks a little bit different. That's all
It
I'm
does.
saying. Mm-hmm.
And I agree. Like, and I've said that a few times. If we're talking, top 10 pick, that to me changes the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be picking bottom of the barrel guys who everybody else looked over and then
Right.
investing in that for the next 2 to 3 years. I don't want to do that.
Right.
But top tier talent is top tier talent. And so then you move from there. Um, I'll also say, and I don't know, again, I just say it's faith, but I actually think this team kind of, I don't think I want this team to have any more gimmies. Can I just be honest? I really want to be able to evaluate this team for what
Mm-hmm.
they are. And we heard so much in the first 4 weeks that they played this team and they played that team. I don't really want any more of those. I really don't. I want to know one way or the other. I don't want a bunch of question marks about, well, they did win those last 4 games, but look who they played. I
Right.
don't want that. I want to know who's in, who's out, or who can we not. what areas of the scheme are legitimate and what aren't. I think you have to play reasonable conversation, and that's what I like about. There's an optimistic side. What I
Mhm.
like about the schedule moving forward is that it's reasonable competition and there are no gimmies.
Right.
But I also don't think there's any other than maybe the Bills where you automatically just say the Seahawks have no chance.
Right.
I think the Bills are the only team, and that's because of Josh Allen, frankly, not because the team is just built so great. But because of Josh Allen, you can say that's a scheduled L. Every other game, even the Jets, I know they just got Devontae Adams. I don't know if that saves them, frankly. Um, so I just there's no other team also that I'm just like the Seahawks don't have a chance. Even the 49ers, like you said, that game, as bad as it was for the Seahawks, and it was bad,
Mhm.
they were still kind of in that game. It was still fairly competitive. And I still think there are some adjustments that they can make to be more competitive. One of them being health, in the next in the next round. So we'll see. I mean, the Rams are still a question. Obviously, the Rams have owned. For some reason, I have a strange optimism that Mike McDonald will fare well against the Rams, but maybe not against the 49ers.
Mhm.
Complete, maybe it's a little bit of optimistic take. I'll admit that, but yeah, neither here nor there. All right. Well, we have definitely talked about every aspect of the Seahawks and the state of the
Yeah,
Seahawks for
true
sure.
360 today.
You
True
did a whole 360
360.
today for sure. Tino, man, tell those people where they can find you. Let's get us out of here.
You can find me on Twitter at Tino Jr. 20, TINOJR20. Talk baseball, talk Mariners, talk fantasy sports. Certainly talk Seahawks. I would love to interact with you. Some fantasy baseball content coming down the pipe pretty soon here.
Awesome stuff. All right, be sure to follow the show on Twitter at Seahawks360pod. Also, if you're listening on YouTube, thanks for listening to the end. Be sure to give us a like and a follow. Click that notification bell so you can make sure you get updates as we continue to upload more content. Until then, that's all the time we have for today. That's it. We're out. And as always,
Go
go
Hawks.
Hawks.